Hello, folks. I have big news about Star Wars Universe Podcast, letting everyone know that we're going to be coming off of hiatus and back to regular episodes at the beginning of December. We're also going to be making some big changes. I'm bringing on a couple of new people as guests. We may be changing the name of the podcast and just kind of giving it a little bit of a different spin. The same kind of content we've been giving you, but bringing in some new perspectives and using that to shape things in a little bit of a different way. We're going to be finishing up Rebels. Riki and I are recording on that as we speak. We have a lot of other great content. For the moment, with the strike going on, we're going to focus primarily on the animated content, but there are a lot of other good things we can bring to you, and even more once the strike ends. So thank you so much for being a fan. Thank you so much for subscribing. $5 a month, or you can sign up for 1 year in total and save $5 for $55. And that means you get ad-free content, you get the bonus content, and most importantly, you get to help support this podcast. It's a lot of work putting it all together. There's a lot of money involved in terms of website hosting and all that kind of stuff. Just anything that you can do to help support this, it really helps me and everyone else know that you care about this podcast, that you want to still keep it coming. So whether or not you are a member, of course, you're still going to get access to great episodes. For the next couple weeks, we're going to be running back some of our older episodes, some old favorites. Stick around for those, and remember that the first week of December, new episodes are coming. Thank you so much. We have spoken. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Universe Podcast. We're in a little bit of a waiting period. Kenobi has come to an end. Andor is about 2 months away. It's going to launch on my birthday, a great birthday present. And in the meantime, we're going to do some fun episodes looking back at things. And today, Paul and I are going to talk about why it is that we love Star Wars animation so much. What is it about animation that proves a really good way to tell the Star Wars story? And what are some of our favorite moments from our favorite shows? All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. This is Matthew, your host. I use they, them pronouns.
And I am Paul. You're totally not a guest host. I also lightly prefer they, them pronouns.
So I actually had a funny moment. I recently recorded an episode of Superhero Ethics that's also Marvel Movie Minute because it's done in partnership with Andy from there. And I referenced how I had been a guest on the Marvel Movie Minute season of Thor, and he got very upset. I was like, no, you were a co-host. So apparently the avoidance of co-hosting duties is a thing. So you have often said that the Star Wars animation is some of your favorite Star Wars, and that animation is in many ways, you think, one of your favorite ways to tell Star Wars stories. So let's just kind of jump right into the topic. What is it you like so much about animation as a means of telling the Star Wars story?
Well, I think the Star Wars movies originally were done with a lot of practical effects, right?
Right.
It was this really big vision to make these bombastic movies that had, all sorts of aliens and spaceships fighting and, lightsabers and all these things that were really hard to film. And, given the technology that was available in the late 70s and then early 80s, they did a phenomenal job of that, right? Yeah. And then as time went on, the movies, continued to try and push the envelope. I think sometimes in effective ways and sometimes in somewhat awkward ways, right? But the thing about animation is that you can just put whatever you want on the screen. Right. And granted, actually, I don't think the Clone Wars, or for that matter, Rebels, overall have the highest quality animation compared to some other animation that I enjoy. But for me,
certainly the first couple seasons of Clone Wars are pretty rough.
Yeah, for sure. And it's all this very kind of computer-based animation, right? It's not, it's not all hand-drawn and whatever. There are things that I think are really beautiful about it. Even in some of the early Clone Wars, I think the settings really come to life. And you can have these settings that are very extreme and very visual in a non-Earth way. And that's just animation, and then the characters are animation, and everything goes together very naturally. Whereas when anything sci-fi or fantasy or space opera is done in live action, there's always going to be a little bit of the, well, here's the humans that look like humans, and then here's everything else that is like not of this world, and it's some combination of effects and makeup, and no matter how great of a job you can do of it, there's always, to me, there's like a little there's just a little kind of awkwardness there sometimes, right? And when I really, really love the subject matter, it doesn't bother me so much, but it still can kind of pull me out of it a little bit sometimes, right? Not always. I never feel that with animation, right? That's one thing that I love about animation in general is like, in order to start watching it and enjoying it, like, you have to immediately buy in right at the beginning. It's like, these are drawings, right? There's no illusion there. And so everything, I think, then feels like it's consistent within that paradigm, as long as it's, well done enough.
I think that's a really good point. I definitely think, especially the prequels, kind of suffered from too much CGI. And I say that as someone who, like, I recently did a conversation about Thor: Love and Thunder, a movie that I quite enjoyed. But I said to my partner, I think about 80% of this was shot on a green screen. You know? Like, it just, the over CGI of stuff is happening all over, not just in Star Wars. And when I rewatch, like, Return of the Jedi, I love that movie still. The Rancor effects have not held up very well. For sure,
absolutely.
But that's the thing, is the fact that animation, like, it doesn't lower the bar, but it kind of equalizes everything.
Yeah, it levels everything.
And I think you had to kind of drag me a little bit to get me to watch the Clone Wars. And I think one of the biggest reasons that was holding me back was I just felt like I was never going to believe a drawing of Obi-Wan Kenobi was the Obi-Wan Kenobi of Alec Guinness.
Right.
Or even Ewan McGregor. And I was so proven wrong on that. And to me, that's one of the most brilliant things about the way the animation has worked, is that, like, there are times when the two work so seamlessly to me, in terms of how well they captured, I think, kind of that feel of the original movies, where it did, like, because the cantina scene, like, it does feel like those don't look like effects. They look just like other people in this cantina.
Yeah.
And the animation, I think, really kind of captures that. I think a thing that I really love about the animation is that, and this is something you and I talk about a lot, is that one of the problems with these big expanded universes is, well, you'll get this moment where a person who's not, their name isn't in the title of the show should show up for this episode, but they're not going to pay that actor who gets huge amounts of money to show up for this one episode. Or what, that's an oversimplification, but you know what I mean. All the reasons why they're not going to have this character show up here. The Clone Wars especially, Rebels somewhat, but the Clone Wars especially, is, I think, the biggest ensemble of an ensemble show I've ever seen. Just off the top of my head, I can think of at least 30 characters who not only appear in multiple episodes, but appear in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. You've got so many Jedi, so many droids, so many clones, so many different, like, scum and villainy people. I don't think you could ever possibly do a live-action show like that, where you could have, oh, hey, the actor who plays, Kai Mundi is going to show up 2 or 3 episodes a season, but we're always going to get him. We're always going to be able to get the whoever it is we need for this particular episode. With voice actors, that's just so much easier. And I think you and I had the same discussion about the Justice League, the animated show, and why that'd be a lot harder to do. And I think that's something that I never really realized until I saw the Clone Wars, and then I started getting more frustrated with these other shows that didn't have all those actors bouncing back and forth. And it's just, when you want to tell that kind of galaxy-wide story with all these different characters, all of which have their growth and their development, I just don't think you can do that in live action without getting 50 people to sign away the next 10 years of their life. Which MCU is probably going to try and do, but, like,
Yeah, like, I'm thinking of, like, Game of Thrones or something that did have a massive ensemble cast, right? But, didn't they actually recast at least 1 or 2 characters midway, right?
Yeah, they recast a couple actors and they also said a couple times that they, like, used this character for the plot point because the original character was like, no, I did 2 seasons 4 years ago, I'm done,
Right. Yeah, and that, I mean, like in Harry Potter, they recast Dumbledore because the actor died, right?
Right.
Whereas in They
also recast Lavender because they didn't want Ron dancing with a black girl, which is a whole other thing.
That's a whole thing. Yeah. But, like, in in animation, you can, I mean, in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Mako, who voiced Uncle Iroh, died.
Right.
And, maybe they used him less in season 3 because of that. I'm not sure. But they definitely, they got someone to impersonate him. And it's a lot easier, I think, to accept, someone's voice. Like, voice actors can imitate other voice actors, right? That's right. Part of the skill, right? And in Clone
Wars, they had, I think, 3 different actors play Palpatine over the course of the 7 seasons.
Right, exactly. And so, I think there's an extent to which you're more kind of seamlessly replaceable in something like animation, right? And then it also there's not the same time commitment where, it's doing, I haven't done any professional voice acting, right? But I mean, I'm aware of the amount of time. I mean, you just look at the credits pages of voice actors, and you're like, somebody could not get that many credits, like, physically in a lifetime as a meat puppet, as a physical actor. So I think
really, Bradley Baker, the guy who voices the Clone Wars, he did not do, he wasn't doing 10 other projects besides Clone Wars because he was playing. I think he's got a total of 50 different named clones to his resume.
It's something ridiculous. Yeah. Ridiculous. What years was there overlap between that and Avatar: The Last Airbender, or Clone Wars started right after it ended?
I think Clone Wars started after Avatar ended, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. Because Dave Filoni did both. And as did D. Bradley Baker. But
D, I thought it was F. For some reason, I thought it was F. Bradley Baker. That's why I just said Bradley Baker.
Right.
Yes, D. Bradley Baker.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And so it really does. That's one of the things I love about Clone Wars specifically, is that it tells so many different stories within this massive setting over a relatively short time span, right? It's supposedly 3 years in universe, but it's, it's like 7 seasons, which, the 7th season was a little while later, but it doesn't feel like there were a lot of compromises in terms of, we'd love to tell this story, but we just don't know how to do it. It feels
you couldn't have an actress play teenage Ahsoka for 7 years. She would age out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, having covered Stranger Things recently, we are intimately familiar with that person doesn't look like what I think their character is supposed to look like at this point. Whereas, you just age them up exactly how much you want in animation, right? And, and in the voice actors can change the voice accordingly, however they choose to, right? I just think animation. And this, this was before The Mandalorian. I think it showed also how much a setting like Star Wars can really be explored on another level in a series, right? Yeah. That's not a series of movies. It's not a series of blockbusters. It's a series of episodes. And, they're short episodes, but you string 2, 3, 4, 5 together if you want, and you get a pretty good arc, right? You get a mini movie, but you don't have to come back to this or that. And granted, the Clone Wars was a little all over the place at times in terms of the sequence of storytelling. And I think some people would say that's a little bit to its detriment. Fine. But I think you get so much opportunity, and there's never a story that you have to say no to because of logistics, right? You just decide what stories you want to tell, and then you get to tell those stories. And I just think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in some ways I think I prefer Rebels to Clone Wars, in part because it is a more tight story about a small group of people. But I love that Clone Wars exists, and I feel like so much. I think Clone Wars added more to my understanding of the Star Wars universe and the characters in it than I think any other property, because it is just this galaxy-wide show over 7 seasons that explores so much. All these different clone interactions, all the stuff about the Jedi, all the stuff about the Sith and the non-Sith dark side Force users.
Yeah. There's just a lot there.
Yeah. I think the other reason why I was nervous about getting too into Clone Wars, and then all the animation in general, was kind of the same reason I was nervous about getting into the books for a while. I didn't want to go into, a dead end. Like, right. I didn't want to get really invested in a part of the universe that was never going to show up in any other part of the universe.
Oh, okay.
The fact that now, especially with the Disney Plus shows, Bo-Katan is now a live-action character being played by the person who was her voice actress.
Yeah.
Ahsoka is a live-action character being played by someone different, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
A lot of the characters and storylines from these animated shows have crossed over into live action, and to me, that makes it feel so much more of a we're not saying like live action better, and Clone Wars is kind of the redheaded stepchild of all this. It's just animation is just a part of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. They integrated it in a way that, something like the MCU never really did with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or the Netflix MCU, right? Not so much that the movies themselves acknowledge its existence, but like the movies and then the TV shows definitely play off it. And I think there's a feeling that's like, oh, well, these are live action, so they're more real. But it's like, no, they reference a lot of stuff in a series.
Yeah, definitely.
There is one more thing in animation that I really enjoy that's much more personal. That is, when you watch an animated show dubbed, you're doing the same thing as when you're watching an animated show that isn't dubbed, because it was dubbed. That's what animation is, right? It's like you're not dubbing over a physical actor. It doesn't have this kind of weird barrier. Like, I tried watching the Netflix MCU in Spanish or in German or Italian or whatever, and I was like, this feels weird, because I see the lips moving and something else is happening. Whereas with animation, they often have, Disney now has tons of languages for all of these, and so I really enjoy watching them in various languages, as it's a way for me of kind of, first of all, kind of getting a different angle or a different feel on, the stories, right? And I feel like Imperial stuff sound really good in German, but I
think I remember, didn't you not realize that all the clones were done by the same voice actor in English because you hadn't seen it and you hadn't listened to it in English?
I had no idea. I hadn't listened to it in English for a long time. I basically turned it in onto English first when I think Darth Bane appears as voiced by Mark Hamill. I was like, all right, I'll listen to Mark Hamill here. Yeah. And then I did hear more recently because, my wife watched them in English, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is good in English too, But it definitely, for me, it's like I feel like, well, I'm kind of like expanding my mind and learning something and practicing something while enjoying animation, So it's a way of kind of blending enjoyment with learning something else. And, but broader, just like that lends a lot of accessibility, right, worldwide to speakers of many languages.
I also just think the technology of animation has gotten so much better. It's gotten both so much better, but also as people take it so much more seriously, people are putting so much more money into it. And I think, I don't think Clone Wars or Rebels were pioneers of that by any means. Most of that's coming out of anime and some other animated stuff. But, just as an example, Paul and I have both talked about how much we love the lightsaber battle between Ahsoka and Maul in Clone Wars Season 7. While doing some research for this episode, I always wondered how they animated that so well. They actually had Ray Park, the person who originally played Darth Maul, and someone else doing a lightsaber battle in real life with motion capture, and then transferred that to animation, which just blew my mind. Thinking about that's kind of going the backwards way that you'd often think it going. And I just love that we have that technology now, and I think it's a big part of what makes it work so well.
Yeah, for sure. It's Lauren Mary Kim,
Lauren Mary Kim, thank you.
I brought this up when we covered it originally, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did.
But yeah, it's she's actually, I think she's the stunt double for Miss Marvel.
Oh, that's awesome.
And she's done a ton of stuff. But yeah, it is really and that's such a great lightsaber battle,
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I think it manages to combine, the physicality of humans, like the way people really move, or I guess they're not humans, right? But the actors are. But the way people move with things that you can do in animation that would have had to be green screen, right? Because they're like up on all sorts of different,
like to me,
buildings and stuff.
What I think it really stands out against what I think was maybe the worst lightsaber fight, Yoda versus Palpatine in episode 3.
Right,
where Yoda's just this bouncing ball with a lightsaber, rocking all over the place, and it doesn't look like anything that makes sense in our own world.
Yeah. I will say that I actually, on some level, enjoy the bouncing ball of lightsaber. Like,
that's fair.
I totally respect where you're coming from with it, and I understand, especially the sort of idea that, like, one of Yoda's greatest lines is like, wars not make one great, Yeah. And so it kind of like flies in the face of that, or bounces in the face of that. But at the same time, like in the theater, the first time I saw Yoda take out his lightsaber, it's like, oh, Yoda's taking out his lightsaber.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
But I'm with you, like, philosophically, I feel you. And specifically the one versus Palpatine, and like Palpatine's like spinning in some sort of corkscrew. It's very weird looking. It
doesn't look like real people are doing it.
Right, yeah. The Yoda versus Dooku, I definitely thought was actually better, but
I think so. I think that's fair. Yeah, I have my issues on the disability side, but
right,
that's a whole
and I respect that. I think that makes all the sense.
So let's start talking about some of the individual shows. And what I did was I kind of put together a list of some of my favorite moments, and I want to go show by show, and we'll kind of talk about the overall show, and then what are some of both of our favorite moments. And first, we were going to do like what are our top 10, but it's so hard to rank these. They're all just great. And I want to start with a show that we haven't mentioned yet that I was not a big fan of. My sense is that you were not a big fan of, I don't even know if you've seen it. Star Wars Visions.
Oh, yeah, I watched like 2 episodes and I just didn't really get into it.
Yeah.
It's not so much just the show itself. I really love the idea of it, but I just didn't quite get into it. And I think just when it was coming out, I just was kind of like not in the mood to watch certain things,
That's fair.
So I might circle back to it, but yeah.
Most of them don't really fit into the larger story. My friend Jonah, who's been on the podcast a bunch of times, and he does a wonderful podcast on the Star Wars Legends books called The Archives Are Incomplete. I strongly recommend people checking it out. He described the show as, this is what people in the Star Wars universe would watch on TV. Like,
I like that.
These were fictional stories as told by the people in that universe. And I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I think the show is fantastic. That particular style of animation, I'm not much of an anime guy, so that never really grabbed me. And I think because also it didn't fit into the universe, it didn't really grab me.
Yeah.
I want to go back and rewatch some of it, though. But there's one particular moment that I wanted to highlight because I love it so much. And it's in the first episode. Okay. So when you have
I did watch that one, yeah.
The duel. And it's basically like a samurai story, a Ronin story. And it's all black and white except for the lightsabers, which is such a brilliant, like, a use of animation that's so great. But the particular moment that I liked was it is set up as these Sith have come to the village, and the Sith are doing terrible things, and now here comes this Ronin who's going to be the cowboy, the wandering samurai, the one who comes to rescue the day, the Mandalorian.
The man with no name.
Exactly. He pulls out his lightsaber, and it's red.
Yeah.
And like he also is he's clearly a hunter of the Sith, but he's also clearly like Sith himself or Darkseid himself. Like it's not clear, but it was like I literally gasped when he did that, and I was like, oh, okay, this is about like inter-Sith fighting, and like maybe there's different perspectives, and maybe this guy is trying to be a little bit more on the like up and up, but he's definitely not a Jedi.
Right.
I just love that moment because it was such a fun way to like play with expectations and be like, no, what if the story isn't like good guy with blue lightsaber against bad guy with red lightsaber?
Yeah, I love that moment too. That's kind of like that's the moment when the show could have sold me on its premise, but then the next episode is just something completely different, which is like I love that idea of an anthology, but I think I watched 2 episodes of Visions. I watched 2 episodes of What If. Like for some reason I just haven't totally gotten into the anthologies. Even though I do really enjoy the idea of them. I almost feel like if it had come out, did it come out one a week? Or was
No, I was gonna say I think I liked What If a lot more until the last couple episodes.
Right.
I think it's because it came out once a week. Because binging it's jarring, but if you watch it once a week, it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of like, Twilight Zone. It's going to be a new story every week, and that was a little easier to get into.
Yeah, I think something that's an anthology of shorts basically makes more sense as watch one here and there compared to something that's like really just serialized fiction, one story. There's one reason that the Bad Batch being weekly didn't bother me, because it felt like each episode was really a different episode, whereas these stories that it's basically 6 episodes, that's a 4-hour movie, those feel to me like, well, I kind of just want to watch all that at once, whereas something like Visions, I think I will circle back to it, and that moment is fantastic, particularly because it's like the black and white with the red, it pops so much. There's a moment that's similar to that and almost the opposite later that I want to get to, but that is a really great moment, and I do feel like I like that style of animation, but it feels very un-Star Wars in a lot of ways, so I think it's the sort of thing that sometimes, like, if you pick it up and it doesn't quite resonate, then like putting it down and picking it up again later, sometimes I think it can feel like click more.
And that's why I like Jonah's idea a lot more. Like, this is the fiction that would be written by people in the Star Wars universe, because then you don't have to try and fit it into where it,
Yeah, that makes sense. I like that.
All right, so I think that's the only thing. That's the only moment I had from Visions. Was there another moment you had from Visions you wanted to mention?
There's, I think one of the other ones that I watched was there's like that band. And it's this really weird story. But then the band, I think all their musical instruments are like guns and lightsabers or something, right? And then, I don't know, that felt like very sort of like Desperado to me a little bit.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that moment, like at the sort of the end of their show, or they play like one song or something. I thought that was pretty cool. But
yeah, that was a lot of fun. All right, so let's go into the Clone Wars. That's the one that comes next chronologically, and I think we're both going to have a couple of moments from this one. We've talked about the show a lot. I think kind of my overall wrap-up of it, though, is like I love that the Clone Wars exists. It's a close second to Rebels for me, but I think I like Rebels a little more, mostly because I think there are very few bad episodes of Rebels, at least as I feel it, and there are definitely a lot of clunkers in Clone Wars, and in part because there's just so many more episodes. It's 7 seasons compared to 4, and 2 of those 4 of Rebels are half seasons. But I just feel like because of Clone Wars is not as consistent, but there are definitely some arcs that I really love, and I think honestly, season 7 of the Clone Wars may be the best season of Star Wars television I've ever seen. What's your kind of take on Clone Wars and where it fits and everything else?
So, first of all, we were going to make this list of, I was like, hey, why don't we make a list of our 10 favorite blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't do the homework. Matthew did. But I literally have written down every minute of the last season on my list of moments. So I feel like Rebels definitely gets the consistency award, right? There's a couple things they did that I really didn't like. That's not so much things that I think are bad as much as just things I really didn't like, right? Yeah. Clone Wars has more things that I'm like, you probably could have done better with this. But my favorite parts of Clone Wars, I think, are definitely better than, I like them more than any part of Rebels. There's like 2 main things in Rebels that I think are just like super, super top notch. But before we get to the last season of Clone Wars, because I almost feel like that's its own thing, and there's like so many moments there. There's a couple of moments before that, most of them Anakin, and it's, to me, like, the reason that I wanted you to watch this series in the first place was because I felt like it did such a good job of actually showing Anakin go from, this teenager who, like, I guess he's already killed a bunch of Tuskens, and the women and the children too, right? But like, he's that guy in Attack of the Clones, and to see his growth as a character and to see kind of where he's willing to bend the rules, right? To blur the lines. And, the first one when, like, Ahsoka gets kidnapped, I think. Ahsoka's captured, and he's trying to get information. And, the dude is like, oh, well, a Jedi can't make me do this. And he's sort of like, he's like, oh, you can't make me with the Jedi mind trick. And he's sort of like, well, maybe I'll just force choke you, Yeah. And...
Yeah, my enjoyment of the third movie, Revenge of the Sith, increases significantly because of the Clone Wars. Because I think the Clone Wars does such a good job of showing how Anakin falls and showing how it dramatically goes, and really both highlighting the problems with the Jedi in a way the movies kind of hinted at but never really got there.
Yeah.
And showing that in many ways it's because Anakin wants to do the things that the Jedi won't let him do for dumb reasons. But it's that kind of thing where it's like, there's going to be a weird metaphor, but I think it's actually really appropriate, is like when you don't give kids sex ed, they're going to look for it and often find it in the worst of places, and like get into danger and stuff like that. Not always, by any means, but it's like, give people that information. I think Anakin's kind of similar. Like, no one else will take him seriously except Chancellor Palpatine.
Right.
And the show shows that so perfectly. And
for sure.
Get that.
For sure.
I think let's kind of go season by season with some of our favorite moments from it. I'll also just say, in terms of what you were saying about Rebels and Clone Wars, my top two moments were very close. One was from Rebels, one was from Clone Wars. The one in Rebels is a little higher, but it's close. And frankly, they could be switched, and they're both about Ahsoka.
Right, yeah.
So, who is a Clone Wars character.
Yeah.
But the first moment on my list, if we're going to go through it, is from Clone Wars Season 2, Episode 13, Voyage of Temptation. And with a couple of these, it's like, this is one particular moment that really highlights a dynamic and a character arc that I love so much. And it's when Satine says, "Senators, I presume you are acquainted with a collection of half-truths and hyperbole known as Obi-Wan Kenobi." Obi-Wan says, "Your Highness is too kind." Satine says, "You're right, I am." I love the Satine-Kenobi relationship so much, and I think it adds so much to his character in ways that are just so heartbreaking. And like the moment at the end where she dies in his arms, and he said, he's like, and earlier he says, like, "I would have given it all up for you." Like that's powerful too. But for some reason, this moment, it just, like, I like them wisecracking with each other. I love the way they flirt with each other, and it was just so. It's so nice to see that side of him, but also, and I said this before, so I'll be brief. I think that knowing that he came so close to leaving it all for Satine and denied himself, I think that's a big part of why he cannot bring himself to stop Anakin and Padme. And that's definitely on my list of moments.
I agree. That moment didn't necessarily pop out to me. I haven't rewatched the entirety of Clone Wars for a while. I've seen pieces here and there. I watched it like 6-7 years ago, something, mostly, several times, but in Spanish and then in German, and then but I find the Satine Obi-Wan dynamic fantastic, and really the thing that makes Obi-Wan more of a character than really anything else, right? And it's not that he needs to have, a potentially, romantic relationship or flirtation, but it's something outside of the Jedi Order. It's something outside of, his missions. It makes him not just someone who's doing specific things, fulfilling a role in the plot, or being a mentor to Anakin or Luke later, right? It makes him somebody with his own desires and his own motivations that aren't solely given to him by the Jedi Order. He
gets to be the protagonist in a lot of stories in a way he never does in the movies.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's something I really appreciate.
Absolutely. And like, I wonder whether you ever get like an Obi-Wan live action series if you don't have this Obi-Wan from, the Clone Wars.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if you do, but certainly I don't feel like I would have enjoyed Kenobi as much as I did. Granted, it's not my favorite, but still. Sure. And I do think that Hayden Christensen's the direction and the writing was much better, and that's probably a big part of it. I think Hayden Christensen was a much better Anakin, in part because he watched all of Clone Wars. And I think Matt Latner, how do you pronounce his last name? Latner?
I think it's Latner, yes.
Yeah, Matt Latner, the voice actor of Anakin. Just the chemistry between him and Padme is so much better than it ever was in the shows.
It exists.
In the movies. Yes, exactly. And again, like, I just watched Natalie Portman in a movie and was reminded, like, no, she's a really good actress. That's bad directing.
Right. So I have a related moment.
Go for it.
And it's actually an Anakin moment, but it's a Satine and Obi-Wan. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where Obi-Wan, so Satine is this pacifist, right? She's this pacifistic ruler of Mandalore, which is like, if you know anything about Mandalorians from The Mandalorian, you're like, wait, how does that work? It turns out not very well. But, and not necessarily her fault, right? But some things happen. There's some goings on in the galaxy.
She's trying to quickly turn a very large ship.
Right. And so her and Obi-Wan are on this ship, and somebody's holding them both hostage, basically. And it's like, I'm gonna, he's trying to escape or something. He's like, I'll shoot you if you stop me. He's like, who's going to stop me? A pacifist and a Jedi who's never going to, kill someone in cold blood. And they just see a lightsaber pop out through the back of him. And then he slumps down and it's Anakin. And Anakin just has this expression like, what?
Yeah.
Sort of like, hey, how's it going?
And this sounds over the top. It's not. It's subtle, but it's so perfect for we get like 3 bars of the dark side theme when that happens.
Yeah.
And it's, moments like that to me are such good parts of the Anakin's fall story. That moment, I probably have like 2 or 3 that are honorable mentions. That moment was definitely one of them.
Yeah. And
do you remember what episode that's from?
I don't. It has to be somewhere in that same time, though, right?
Yeah, it's in season 2 because it's that arc with. Well, actually, no. I think the Satine arc goes over a couple seasons. But we'll try and look all these up and put them into the show notes.
Oh yeah, show notes. Yeah. And those things, though, the reason I think they're so effective is it's not like, oh, Anakin's kind of slipping and doing a bad thing. It's like, I might have done that, it's like, maybe you feel like someone should have killed this guy at that point. Maybe it shouldn't be a space cop. There's all sorts of ramifications, whatever. Like, if you can peaceably subdue someone, which if you have the Force, it feels like you should be able to do these things better. But we did have a moment where Obi-Wan doesn't kill someone in his own show that might be seen as problematical. So exactly. So it's the point is that there are things where he's willing to do something that other people aren't willing to do, and it's an act that is, either seen as questionable or is questionable, but in context where it's very understandable, right? It doesn't feel contrived. It doesn't feel ridiculous. It feels like, that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So the next moment I had, I think since I have a firm list, I'm going to kind of go through my moments, but you can jump in. There's a lot of good stuff in 3 and 4, but none of them made my list. But in season 5, and again, it's my favorite quote from a character who is just, I think, after Ahsoka, the best character that I think was introduced in the animated shows and that I really want to see live action. And it's in season 5, and Darth Maul says to a group of scum and villainy, "Filth, you will pay for your insolence." And Hondo Ohnaka, the Jack Sparrow of the Star Wars universe, says, "Insolence? We are pirates. We don't even know what that means." I love Hondo Ohnaka so much. And he's
so
like, I think in some ways him and Cad Bane are perfect foils for each other because one is basically a black hat out of a cowboy movie. I mean, literally he's got that hat.
Yeah.
And he's just such a good, intimidating villain who has no powers. He's just badass. And then Hondo Ohnaka, who, like I said, I think he's the Jack Sparrow, without quite the sex appeal, except to some of us.
I mean, whatever you're into, but...
one of my co-hosts who will be unnamed. Not you. But I just mean I'm referring to someone who's been on record that this is husband number 2. Hondo is one of my... He brings an he brings an era of levity. He brings this idea of yes, he always wants to come out on top, but he also loves the game.
Yeah.
Like, one of the other quotes I could have used is one where Ezra double crosses him, and he's like, "Oh, you double crossed me! I'm so proud!" Like,
yeah.
He's just such a good character. That's my that's my number 5.
Yeah. Yeah, I there's so many great Hondo moments. That's one of them for sure. And I think he's another example of like a character who was introduced in the Clone Wars, right? As far as I know, created for the Clone Wars, and then ended up being a really significant and highlight part of Rebels, right? Yeah. Where there's a bunch of good moments in the Clone Wars. And, he starts out primarily as an antagonist, and then sometimes he's mostly an antagonist, right? They're not working with him that much in the Clone Wars. It's more Rebels.
I wonder, Paul, if there's a term for this. He's an antagonist. No, actually, no, this wouldn't count. I'll cut that out. He's an antagonist who most of the time winds up being the kind of like grudgingly helping our heroes.
Right.
Or our heroes are grudgingly helping him.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, the whole scum and villainy side, I think it obviously becomes a big deal in Rebels as well, but in Clone Wars, they just flesh it out a lot more than I think it had been. It was something that you got the flavor of in, Star Wars, and a little bit in Return of the Jedi, and then a little bit in the prequels, but not a ton, right? And I mean, maybe a little in Rogue One also, right?
Yeah.
But the Clone Wars really, I mean, you have little kid Boba Fett too, right? Working with various different bounty hunters, and
you get Sin, you get the reptilian, the Tardashian, I think it's not Tardoshan. What the hell is that race called?
Tardoshan.
But the reptilian guy, Bosch, who's the reptile bounty hunter who became a little fan favorite. Like, all he did growl. But yeah, he becomes a regular character. There's so much of the scum and villainy in Clone Wars and Rebels.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the things that we didn't actually talk about with Clone Wars, but that I think is important, is I think it is one of the best prequels that I've ever seen. In terms of, it adds a lot to what comes after it. It builds on what came before it. But it very rarely contradicts or creates conflicts with things that came before it. And, Ahsoka, I think, being the one, like, why does Anakin never mention Ahsoka during Revenge of the Sith? But that's a different story. And there's one moment that, for me, is just a perfect moment of, this is how a prequel should add to the story, but in a way that ties up the loose ends that you never wonder why it isn't. And it's Clone Wars Season 6, Episode 4, Orders, The Death of Fives. And it's Fives is this character. He's a clone, but he's the one who figures out that there's a chip in their heads, in part because of the death of another clone, and he's investigating it. And it's very much like a spy thriller where you it's going to have this tragic ending because our hero's going to find the truth, but no one's going to believe them.
Right.
And that's exactly what happens with Fives, and he dies in Rex's arms, and you can just tell that Rex so badly wants to believe him, but just can't quite make himself do it. And that moment helps set up Rex actually believing it in Season 7. But even then, I felt like it answered one of the biggest questions of the prequels. Why did the clones turn so quickly? It explained how the chips work, while also tying up the loose ends so well that you never are wondering, well, but why didn't all the clones know about this? And I just, like, it's not perfect. In some ways, I wish the clones had a little more agency than just a chip in their head.
Yeah.
But getting past that, I just think it is, like, to me, like, if I could give a class on how to make a prequel, I would use that moment, that whole character arc.
Yeah, I think that obviously, like, once he knows the truth, you're like, oh, well, this can't end well for him. Like, that happens in movies and series where, like, when you know that, like, the truth isn't going to be able to be discovered by the general populace yet, or by whoever, it's like, the best case scenario is no one believes this person. But they're probably going to get killed, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the whole, like, the chip thing, I'm not crazy about it, but at the same time, I do find it a little more credible than that all the clones turned against against the Jedi all at once by an order from this one dude who, like, it feels more believable, even though it also feels a little like a cop-out in some ways. But I do think once you accept that as like, okay, this is the way it worked, I think they do a great job of it. And then that becomes pivotal in the Bad Batch as well.
Yes,
right.
Very much
and
so.
And I think it's handled really well there. And yeah, this whole arc it's one of those, like, when you have, like, putting together a prequel. And this is like an interquel, right? It's like, it's a prequel to Revenge of the Sith, but it's a sequel to Attack of the Clones. It's like they're sliding in between these two big movies, like 150 episodes of TV or something like that, lot. Right? They're just slipping in 100-something, 40-something, 50 hours of television. And it's like a puzzle, I think. Like, how do you get it to interlock with the sort of the edges of those stories? And I agree with you that Ahsoka, it's like, okay, they wrote her out in a way that makes some sense, and, like, I think originally they were maybe going to kill her off, and then they're like, let's not do that. She's just too good of a character to just, like, waste this early,
Which, thank God that we're getting her back now.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And, then you got those moments in Rebels, right? And,
right.
And then I actually thought when you were bringing up this, I thought one thing that they wrapped up in a similar way was Ventress.
Yeah.
That, like, Dooku had an apprentice, right? But we never see an apprentice in any of the movies. What's up with that? And it's like, well, the apprentice doesn't stay the apprentice because Palpatine's like, hey, you can't have an apprentice. You got to kill her off. So he tries, and it doesn't work super well. And then they introduce the Night Witches, which is, I think, a really fascinating... the Night Sisters? Is that...
Night Sisters, yeah. But they are witches, you're right. Yeah, and... Ventress's story with the Night Witches had a number of honorable mentions for me, and the one that's probably 11 that was so close is the episode of Ahsoka and Ventress as the two people who have kind of both left their orders and are kind of, like, to me, I still want the buddy cop show of those two together, And I will say also, for people who want even more closure on the Ventress story, the book Dark Disciple is, I think, the best exploration of the dark side and the idea of, like, can you use some dark side powers without it corrupting you, and that maybe it's not as black and white as the Jedi would want you to know. And it does give a wonderful kind of closure to Ventress's story in a heartbreaking way. But, it's a really, really good book.
Cool.
So let's make sure this... So the last Clone Wars episode I wanted to bring up, and it actually is very similar to kind of what we were just discussing there. It is from Season 7, and it is part of that last arc. And I really wrestled with trying to find what was the one favorite moment, and the Ahsoka Maul lightsaber fight is up there. But I think even more so, and kind of it's the same thing we're just talking about, there's a moment in Season 7, Episode 10, The Phantom Apprentice, where Ahsoka and Maul are talking. And some of it's them, like, kind of trash talking each other and things like this, but they're getting but part of what they're realizing is that both of them have been abandoned by their respective orders. He wanted to be with Palpatine, like you said, or you didn't bring this up, but Palpatine, like, kind of kicked Maul out, and Ahsoka's she chose to left after the Jedi, but really because she saw, like, how terrible they were, and they had kicked her out. And it's just this really touching moment between the two of them kind of realizing that even though they're on very opposite sides, that they really have this connection. And to me, then it is paid off so well with once she has defeated him in that epic lightsaber battle, and now the whole ship turns on her, she releases him. And he thinks, like, he has this moment, and I almost feel bad for him, because he's like, wow, I have an ally. And he's like, well, can you give me a lightsaber? Because she basically says, I need you to create a distraction for me. And he says, well, can you give me a lightsaber so I can survive? And she says, I'm not rooting for you.
Yeah. Yeah, she's like, oh, I'm not rooting for you.
It's so brutal, but it's so... And I love that moment for her, I love that moment for him, but yeah, to me, it's all teed up by that great discussion they have in The Phantom Apprentice.
Yeah, for sure. Going back a little, the whole thing of Ahsoka leaving the Order, I think that was all. That's not so much a moment, but like the way they don't trust her, and then she like actually teams up with Ventress for a minute. That's like sort of your buddy cop moment.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But it doesn't really last that long, and then she decides to lead the Order. And now here, where she's like, she's not back to be a Jedi. She's just back to do this one thing, right? And then she has that conversation with Maul, which is awesome. They have the lightsaber battle, which is amazing. I think maybe that's the best lightsaber battle in all of Star Wars. Like, I can't think of one that I think is better, you know?
In terms of like pure fight choreography, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Others have more emotional resonance for me, but that I think is just in terms of like a fun fight to watch.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Yeah, I mean, like the one at Return of the Jedi will always be the climactic, epic, most important lightsaber battle that, in my view, of you know, the galaxy, right? But and this one doesn't have it. It has emotional stakes, but it's this like it is this sort of like second tier lightsaber battle in terms of like these are the apprentices, right? These aren't the masters, but the fight choreography is just spectacular.
And so I think it's kind of the tragedy of it is, to some ways, you know that like this fight doesn't matter.
Right.
It's happening against the background of Order 66 about to happen.
Yeah.
You know what comes next, and neither of these characters filter into it. And that, it's just like, to me, I think the most powerful one is Duel of the Fates, and that might be 90% the music.
Yeah. Well,
frankly,
the music. I mean, you can't argue with the music.
But again, I don't think Duel of the Fates hit me much harder after watching the Clone Wars, because now I was much more invested in the relationship between these two.
Right.
But yeah, definitely agree with you that the Ahsoka falling is definitely part of another great moment.
But yeah, then her with that saying that to Maul, oh, I'm not rooting for you, you know.
Yeah.
And then he goes like full Magneto when he's like in one of the hallways, and he's just like ripping the metal paneling off the walls with the Force and having it like decapitate like a ton of clone troopers or whatever.
Yeah.
That whole season is just, I mean, I've already said it, but there's so many moments in just those last 2 episodes, right? Where, you know, where she's like, you know, you're a good soldier, Rex, you know, and like, it's so heartbreaking to see them like going up against, all the other troopers. I think Jesse is leading them at that point or something, right? And like that they're not going to kill them, but you know, they're not going to just let them kill them. Right. And like all of them having her like a sort of painting of her face basically on their helmets, or some of them doing that, you know?
Yeah.
And like, then like when she walks in and sees that, and then Anakin hands her lightsabers, and like all of that was so awesome. But like the like, to me, the capping moment, and this is sort of where you were talking about visions, this is the thing that to me is sort of a little parallel here, is when you see they've
I think I know what you're talking about.
Buried them all, right?
Yeah.
And they have all of the helmets like on sticks or something, right? Like as like grave markers.
I think it's their rifles.
Oh, it's their rifles. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And then Vader shows up. The last scene of Clone Wars is there's no talking, right? There's just the sound of nature, and it's it's now all covered in snow with this crashed Star Destroyer, right? Or whatever it was called at the time, cruiser, right? And Vader's walking towards like all of those, you know, you see the helmet there with like Ahsoka's face on it, but then you see Vader reflected in it, I think, right? Either that or you see it reflected in Vader's eyes. But then you see this overhead shot. He picks up a lightsaber and turns it on. And like, you know, because there's no sound effect, there's not much music, you like hear the hum of it, and it's blue. And it's Vader standing there in the snow holding this blue lightsaber, you know? Yeah. And to me, that's like, he's just become Vader, right? And he's just traded in for a red one, I guess. I don't know. But it's like, here he is holding this other lightsaber. And it's like, it sort of feels to me like this piece of like who he was, you know, as it's like Ahsoka's, but now here he is as this. And it, to me, that says more about Vader's, to me, I just had this feeling like, oh, he just lives the entire rest of his life just in misery, you know? Yeah. Like, he never gets what he wanted, you know, and like he's just
he couldn't save Padme. He doesn't have his kids until the very end.
Yeah,
he loses Obi-Wan. He loses Ahsoka.
Yeah, he loses his mom. Like everything, and this, it just kind of, without any words, I think really tells so much about Anakin's story and who Vader is then, and everything that had happened between Rex and Ahsoka and all those troopers, you know.
And everything you just said also, again, I think we can start talking about Rebels now, but I'll just start by saying, like, one of the things I love so much about Rebels is how much it pays off. Rebels to me is in many ways a love letter to the Clone Wars.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite moments I'll get to, you can probably guess what it is, but it builds so perfectly on all the Ahsoka Vader stuff. But the other one, and this didn't make my top 10, but again, it was in the top 20 probably, is when Ahsoka and Rex have their reunion in Rebels.
Oh,
and like, it even just starts with, like, Ahsoka won't even go, but, you know, she tells Kanan, you know, I need you to reconnect with a friend of mine. He is a very good military leader. And I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, is this Rex? Is this Rex?
Yeah.
And you get this wonderful... And then, like, there's all this stuff between Kanan and Rex, which winds up being... Well, I'll get to that. Let's talk about Rebels overall. Kind of what... So what...
Are we going to do Bad Batch as it's between?
Oh, yeah, Bad Batch comes there, too, yeah. Thank you. I'm just so eager to jump into Rebels.
We're like almost an hour in, and it's like we're only halfway through the timeline.
I knew this was going to be a long episode. Bad Batch overall, I feel like I really enjoyed. It didn't hit me really hard. And like one thing I found was I was like, I liked Bad Batch, but I was having trouble. There's one moment I found that I want to mention, but I was having trouble finding like individual moments. And like, I don't think I remember individual plot lines that much, but I feel like I could rewatch it and be happy. And that it hit the kind of way I'm starting to measure a lot of Star Wars stuff now is, one, how enjoyable is it as its own thing? And two, how much does it add to the Star Wars universe? And I feel like it did both. It's perfectly enjoyable. There's some fun characters. It's funny. There's a good drama. And I feel like a lot of the questions that I've always had about this like transition, you know, how did it become the Empire? Why did people go along with this? What happened to the clones? It does a really good job of answering those questions in ways I really, really like.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it also gets a consistency award. There's maybe an episode or two that I didn't like as much, but it really, it picks up where Clone Wars left off, like immediately, right? Literally, not even where it left off, it overlaps with the end of, what we were just talking about, right? They start with Order 66, basically, literally, that day. And
I should just say, by the way, a spoiler warning, because we haven't covered... No, wait, we did cover Bad Batch at the show, yeah. Well, I expect if you're listening to this point, you've watched Bad Batch. I'm going to give a spoiler warning just if you're watching Rebels along with this with the show. We will get to season 3 and 4 of Rebels, I promise. Just so much is going on. We are going to spoil some moments from those last 2 seasons, though, so if you haven't seen them yet, you might want to pause and come back to us, but we're going to talk about Bad Batch first, though. So
yeah, at that point, I think when we get to season 3 Rebels, then maybe we'll say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, if you haven't seen Bad Batch, go watch it and skip ahead.
Yeah, it's pretty short, right? It's not a ton of episodes. It's a decent number, but it pays off a lot of, one of the first characters who shows up is Caleb Doom, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a young Kanan Jarrus, and it's got Hera and Chopper, right? And so it really references Rebels, but it also picks up at the end of Clone Wars. And I mean, Clone Wars season 7, the first 4 episodes are basically a backdoor pilot for Bad Batch, right? Yeah. They have 4 episodes introducing these characters, and you get Echo in here, and there was a lot of things that I really enjoyed throughout it. A lot of the kind of Uncle Wrecker stuff, and there is this kind of like sadness that pervades the series, I feel, but not like a depressing sadness, just kind of like a sort of like things aren't going well, but it doesn't feel like there's no hope. But sort of the opposite of that, the one moment that like actually really sticks out really a lot to me is when Omega gets off the ship, the first planet that they go to after leaving, the place she grew up in, that's an ocean planet, and she just was inside this facility her whole life. Like, and she gets out and she's like, oh, this is dirt. Like, I've read about this, like she picks up soil and she's like, there's just like the nature of that planet, and the fact that then that's where they run into what's his name? Cut? Is it Cut? The episode's titled "Cut and Run."
Okay.
But anyway, it's the trooper, the deserter.
Yeah, that's right. Cut. Yeah, that's his name.
Yeah, and basically just that moment of of Omega being like, oh, this is soil, Yeah. And then like the kids being like, do you want to play ball? And she's like, do you want to play catch? And she's like, what's that? And yeah.
It definitely makes me think of, there's kind of a gotcha thing going around the internet of like telling people you need to go touch grass, which is kind of means like you need to go get out of your home and like see the world and remember like not everything is just what you're reading on the internet kind of thing. It's a little silly. It's become a meme, like most memes are. But I always think of that Omega moment when someone says that,
Yeah. Yeah, the internet's the worst. But I do feel like there is this tension between, theory and practice a lot of the time, although it really shouldn't be a tension. It should be more of a compliment. But, But yeah.
I think my favorite moment in The Bad Batch, and it actually addresses kind of what we were talking about before, because I think I love the character of Crosshair so much, because Crosshair to me is someone who we find out later that he had his chip removed, he has agency, and yet he's that person who still has to follow orders and still has to, like, he's not willing to challenge the idea that everything they've been doing is wrong,
right.
And that all these things. And he struggles with it, though. And there's one particular moment, and I forget what has happened, but it's some moment where he has tried to capture the Bad Batch, and they've kind of been like, "Come on, Crosshair, you're our brother," and he says no. And he goes into the barracks that he used to share with them, and now there are these new stormtroopers with him, and he just kind of like sits alone, and it's just like, it's just such this beautiful moment of like. Yeah, he used to be part of this brotherhood, and he, like an Ahsoka, like a Maul, like a Ventress, he's on his own. And he's on his own because he's making terrible choices, and he's a villain, he's an antagonist, but you still feel for him so much in that moment. And to me, that's the one thing that the Chip story doesn't get, is like this, I think a major theme of The Bad Batch is this idea of like there being conflict between the clones about do you trust the Jedi, do you not? Because they spent all this time being taught to completely obey the Jedi, and some of them had Jedi who treated them really well, like Anakin, and others think the Jedi just use them as cannon fodder, and so they're very easy to believe that the Jedi are monsters. And to me, all that is summed up in the Crosshair story.
Yeah, me too. And I was very happy that it turned out that he'd removed his chip, and that he still chose to follow orders, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't programmed to anymore. That's how he viewed things, right? He just decided that's what he does. He follows orders, and he didn't think the Empire was so bad. And while I think he's completely wrong, like, I think he's exactly the type of antagonist that makes sense, is, having it gives some depth, and it is heartbreaking when they realize that, like, no, it's not just the chip. Like, this is Crosshairs, like he was always the sniper, like he's not like just gonna go with them just because they take out a chip. He's like, no, I made my choice. That realization or the confirmation of that, I think for me was a highlight of the Bad Batch. Anything
else on Bad Batch, or should we talk about Rebels?
No, let's move on.
Okay, and I think here we're going to start by just kind of going over the overall what we like about Rebels. And so this will have some spoilers for Season 3 and Season 4. So if you want to check out now, of course, theethicalpanda.com. You'll find all the places to give feedback. Love to hear your feedback. What are your favorite moments from Clone Wars? Paul, you want to give a quick plug for what you're doing these days?
Yeah, I'm Zen Madman. I think we're going to be twitching more whenever this comes out, right? Pretty soon we'll be doing that more. I do like some poker in the mornings, and we're going to be doing some podcasting, and I might be doing some other various stuff in the evenings. I think on Wednesdays and Sundays at 5 p.m. Pacific time. So, yeah, and then, I'm Zen Madman on Twitter and stuff like that.
Definitely. So we'll be right back with Rebels. So we'll get into Rebels right after this commercial break.
That's hilarious. I was going to be like, "What? You should put a commercial here."
I have the chip. Welcome back. All right, so let's talk about Rebels. We talked about it briefly before. Like you said, it wins the Consistency Award. Not needing to kind of go into more about how it compares to others, but just overall, what's your feeling on this show?
Yeah, this show, I remember, I think when we were doing some of the Kenobi feedback or something, you mentioned twisting my arm to watch it, which I think I disputed the exact characterization that way, but, definitely I watched the first several episodes. I think I tried to watch it in French because I don't know why, because I got the discs, right, and I was like, all right, well, I already watched Clone Wars in Spanish a few times, so I'll watch this in French because it only had Spanish and French, and I watched a certain number of episodes. I think I switched back to Spanish or whatever, and I was just I didn't quite get into it. The group didn't quite grab me. And then you started watching it, and you definitely encouraged me to give it another shot. I was like, all right, I'll give it another shot. And again, out of the gate, it didn't super grab me. But, sometimes I can be I'll sort of watch something and do something else. Usually I watch something with full focus, though. And so at a certain point, it kind of turned a corner for me. Sometime maybe late in season 1, I think towards the end of season 1, it might have been some of the Inquisitor stuff. And then season 2 I loved, season 3 I loved, season 4 I loved parts, really disliked a few things, but also saw them coming because it was I don't know how else you're gonna square the circle, kind of. Yeah.
I assumed, and again here are the spoilers.
Yeah.
We're talking about what was almost one of my top 10, the death of Kanan Jarrus.
Yeah. I just absolutely loathed that episode. From the very beginning, I was just oh, this is what's gonna happen here, and it just because whatever. I won't get into it, but I didn't like that part. But I know tons of people love it. I won't rant about it. I do think that's one of those sort of problem with prequels things where, the whole thing with Ahsoka and the whole way they end the season, or the series, it's it's such a wild, what are you doing? But
it's you have to get rid of most of your main characters. And they killed some off, they had some leave, and they're all right, we're kind of out of what about kidnapped by space whale?
Exactly. What about, let's do something with space time, why not? And so that's just oh, okay, fine, that's what they did. And but then I went back and I actually started watching the first season in Cantonese because this is what I do. And I grew to really love it, because I just, when I'm listening to something in a language I really don't know very well at all, I'll listen to the same episodes over and over, and then I'll just know the story beat for beat, Yeah. And I do think that the first season is actually very good. It just, when I first watched it, I didn't have any investment. I just didn't get into it quickly. But once you get to know the characters, I think it becomes much more compelling.
Yeah, I think season 1 is a slow burn, very good setup. And so the first time I didn't really get into it, and then season 2 starts to pay off so much of the stuff from season 1.
Yeah.
So then when you go back and watch season 1, you're oh, okay, I get it. I see this now.
Exactly.
And it just it really works on a rewatch like that.
For sure.
I also think it's interesting to me, with both Clone Wars but I think even especially Rebels, I think with both of them, the voice acting is to me a huge part of what I love about it. And so I always find it interesting that you enjoy it. Like when you talk about watching in other languages, which I think is great, and I think it may well be that those voice actors are also very good. I don't by no means want to assume they're not, but it's always interesting because I feel like you're missing a big part of the show that I've seen at least.
Right. We are watching.
Not missing, you're just seeing a different version of it. Yeah.
Exactly. We are having fundamentally different experiences. In an audio sense, right? And that's a big deal. And with these shows, I really do enjoy the Star Wars animation so much that I do feel like I can watch the show several times, and really, really enjoy it in a different way each time, kind of. And I find that listening to different versions of it, sometimes a story will feel different, in a different language. And I don't know, for me, it gives a little bit of like perspective on like, the world just seems so different to different people, like depending on perspective. And also I think the translations aren't always 100%, they're not like literal, right? Yeah. And so sometimes some things are actually a little different, So yeah, and there have been things where I'm like, oh, I missed that because, maybe I wasn't as good at whatever language it was when I watched it. Right. And then other times I'm like, oh, they actually said something totally different here. That's a little weird. Yeah.
It reminds me of like over on Superhero Ethics, we did an episode on our Kenshin, the first movie, live action, and Riki Hayashi had watched it in Japanese, and he had a very different experience. He had like some different, there were some translation moments that were different, and then we actually had a really good discussion about that. So yeah, I think definitely the languages can be quite different.
Yeah. We watched it in Japanese also, but with the English subs, right? So we're basically reading the movie, and Riki's not reading it in English, just listening to it in Japanese, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Like, I experienced it in English language. I was hearing Japanese as I did it. It's different.
Yeah, for sure.
One other thing I think I love about Rebels, and Clone Wars does this a little bit, but Clone Wars is so far in the past that this is harder. There are a couple of cameos of characters who will be a big part of later movies, the original trilogy, and they have these like 1 or 2 episode arcs that are so perfect for them. Lando Calrissian is so good, and he's not much of an arc. You just get to see him like at his scoundreliest best.
Yeah.
But to me, it's really Princess Leia. We get to see her when she's like 15, and she's just so. I just rewatched this episode with Mary the first time we saw her show up, where she just, she's bossing everyone around, and I mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, she has the like. She feels so self-confident in her authority, even when she is blatantly lying. And as we kind of point out before, one of the things that Rebels shows is, like, at this point in the Empire, like, the person who blusters most wins, because everyone is so afraid, and everyone's so afraid of overstepping someone else's authority. And I just feel like my enjoyment of who Leia is in Kenobi, I think, was increased dramatically because of her appearances in Rebels. Because it just, like, it shows, she's just as confident by the time that, the Flyboys break her out, but it just was so great seeing that young part of her when she is in the Senate and she's pretending not to be part of the Rebels, but she secretly is. And the way she just, like, from the moment they meet, like, is completely in control of Kanan and Ezra. I just love it.
Yeah, I think Leia's great in it. I think it really does gel well with her in Kenobi, the live action 10-year-old. And I mean, to think of it as sort of bridging that to the original trilogy, right? When this actually, they've just gone backwards, right? They did the original trilogy, then they did Rebels, then they did Kenobi, and somewhere in there, I guess maybe around while Rebels was happening, they have the sequel trilogy. But like, I think this Leia is very she feels right, Yeah. She feels like, yes, this feels like who this character is. And I think that would be an interesting, I don't know, like, I feel like if they did a series 5 years from now with the girl from Kenobi, where she's a main character, Like, I'd watch a, like, teenage Leia, like, you know, and I mean, you could be in the Senate, right, when you're a teenager, right? I mean, Padme was, I mean, I know she was a queen or whatever, but, like...
I mean, I think it's entirely possible she's a part of Andor.
Oh, yeah, that seems... Well, yeah, but it wouldn't be the same actress, right? Unless this is... True. I mean, I don't know anything about Andor, except it has Diego Luna, and he's playing Andor. But I've specifically avoided... any of the marketing stuff or whatever.
I think it happens in like the 2 or 3 years before the original movies, but I don't know and I don't want to know.
Yeah, that would be my guess, but whatever. Diego Luna looks like he probably could play himself like the same age for a long time. Like I don't know. Yeah. Like I feel like he's looked the same age for a while, but yeah, I think Leia and Lando both are great moments in the show. I feel like Rebels does a great job of paying off characters from Clone Wars, having either Easter eggs or like full-blown cameos or like significant, roles for characters from the original trilogy and maybe stuff after that without relying on that.
Yeah, like Rex and Ahsoka become main characters. Yeah. Lando and Leia don't.
Right. Yeah, like recurring regular characters, right? Significant part of the main, never quite part of the main group, but like regularly working with them, right? Whereas Leia and Lando kind of just filter in, and like 3PO and R2 also earlier on, right? With Bail, I think, and then Leia shows up later.
Yeah. So let me go through some of my specific moments, and you can talk about yours. I don't have any from season 1. I think there's a lot of great stuff in season 1, but to me, so much of it is paying off season 2. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Where they're facing down, it's the second episode, right? Ezra has been, I've watched these 2 episodes like a dozen times. So basically, Kanan and Zeb or whatever were about to get caught, and then Ezra runs in and gets them to not get caught, but then he gets caught, and then they come back to save him, and then they go to get, pick up the Wookiees from the spice mines or something, and then Agent Kallus, the main antagonist in the beginning, right, in the very beginning, is there, and there's a bunch of stormtroopers, and the Wookiees and the, our rebel team are all pinned down, and Kanan's like, all right, we're going to do a beta 22 or whatever. There's some alphanumeric code or something for it. And they're like, oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. And Ezra's like, do you care to let me in on the secret? And Kanan says, I'm about to let everybody in on the secret, kid. And then he like screws his lightsaber together and like wades out into all the stormtroopers and Kallus. And they're all like, what the? They're like, it's a Jedi. and that moment, but just like, I'm about to let everybody in on the secret, kid.
Such a good line.
It was so good.
Such a good line. Yeah, no, I love that. I love the dynamic between the two of them. Kanan is such a good character, and I know you don't like his end. I love it, but I think we just get so many great moments with him.
Absolutely.
I couldn't find one to make my top 10, but the whole dynamic between him and Rex, like, on the one hand, they play it for comedy a lot, of like kind of Ezra's 2 bickering father figures.
Right.
But you also know there's so much pain there because they both represent this group that they, like, not as much Rex, but like, to Kanan, the clones betrayed him and tried to kill him and did kill his mentor, his master. And to some extent, Rex is like, well, I knew a good Jedi, and he talks very fondly about Anakin, which is kind of heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But he also thinks like a lot of the Jedi were kind of idiots and that his clones were better soldiers than the Jedi.
Right.
And yeah, so the dynamics between the two of them are so good. My first moment is, and it's kind of connected to the Kallus you were talking about, and it's in Rebels Season 2, Episode 17, The Honorable Ones. Because this is where Kallus has been, up to this point, mostly an antagonist. And you've seen him a little, like every now and then, flinching a little bit at some of the excesses of the Empire, but mostly he's going along with it. And this is where him and Zeb get marooned together on this moon off of Geonosis in a frozen planet. and they have to work together, and it's a very much a, like, enemies to buddies story. And I love that kind of story, and that alone is beautiful, but I think it is the turning point, and it's very clearly shown as the first turning point of what I think is one of the best redemption arcs that we've seen. Like, to me, it's up there with Zuko or Catra in terms of just, like, because it's not season 3, he doesn't just say, oh, I had one good conversation with Zeb, I think the Empire's bad, let me come help you. It's 2 seasons more of him being Fulcrum, and then him starting to work with them, but them not believing him, and him slowly becoming part of the team, very much like Zuko did. Actually, given that Filoni is involved with both, that's maybe not coincidental. He knows how to do a redemption story. And frankly, by the end of it, it is not confirmed, and I'm saying, I don't think you're wrong if you don't see this. I think it's very easy to read Zeb and Kallus as romantically involved by the end, particularly with things like, like Zeb takes him to meet his family on the planet of Lasans, the planet of Lasats, and granted it's in part because Kallus has such a history with them, and this moment really gets into that, because one of the things Zeb has been so upset about this whole time is that Kallus has this sword, this like it's like a rifle and a weapon. It's a rifle and a melee weapon that only the honor guard are supposed to have, and Zeb thinks he just like stole it, like when he raided the planet. But Zeb finds out that no, there is this tradition in his people of if you defeat one of that honor guard, they will give you the weapon as a sign of like you defeated me in honorable combat, and that Kallus won it through that, and that Kallus clearly has regret about what turned into a massacre, and it's just. I love their story so much, and watching, to me, that episode is not the only, but one of the real turning points in it.
Yeah, I have Zeb and Kallus on the moon on my list. Yeah. So, for me, there's not like a moment of that episode. It's like the whole thing, Yeah. Basically everything you just said. I didn't see any romance there, but I'm not saying it's not there. Definitely. I like the whole Lasat kind of like they find some like sort of surviving Lasat, right? And they take them back to the homeworld or something, right? Yeah. Or a new place. Is it back to the homeworld?
It's a new place that they have to use kind of their version of force magic to find.
Right. Right. And then the fact that he takes Kallus there at the end, I think, is like very, very meaningful, regardless of how you interpret it. And yeah, I was going to say that scene feels analogous to, there's a scene between Zuko and Aang where they're kind of like, in like season 1, where somebody rescues someone and they're like wearing a mask, and then there's this like, I think we could have been friends in a different world, basically. Yeah. But then it's still 2 seasons before that gets paid off in Airbender. And here it's 2 seasons or a season or 2. It's a while, right? Before we see Kallus as like, certainly it's 2 seasons before he's like a member of the team, and so I really do appreciate that kind of really earned kind of slow, redemption arc. Like, it's an arc. It's not a redemption point, right? Yeah. It's not a carrot.
Very much an arc.
It's an arc.
And it's funny because I went, when I started this rewatch, I remembered the arc. I didn't remember how much of a villain he was. And there's a moment in those first 2 episodes, that first kind of 1 episode arc that's over 2 episodes, I thought you were going to mention, because it was my reminder of like, oh no, they start Kallus off dark. Yeah. Where they've dealt with all this Jedi stuff, everyone's super upset, Kallus is super upset, and like he's clinging to this like, he's clinging to this pole over a deep fall, and there's a stormtrooper like just below him also clinging to it. And the stormtrooper says something like kind of obnoxious, but in a like, wow, can't believe they pulled that off.
He says, he's like, is that the first Jedi you've seen, sir? Or something like that.
Yeah, and Kallus just kicks him in the head, and he falls to his death.
Presumably. People survive falls all the time, but he's not a Sith, so.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is certainly presumed. I don't think Kallus is like looking down and being like, no, it's a short drop. I can kick him.
No. He's like, I'm going to kill this guy because he annoyed me.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh my God, I can't. they're really going to redeem this guy.
Right.
That's a struggle.
Yeah,
and they
sure.
pull it off.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That is like one of my least favorite tropes. The like villain kills someone on their team like just to show that they're a villain, but
that's fair.
That's
fair.
Somehow it's funny here. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like when it's played for like dark, serious, look how evil they are, and I like it when it's played for comedy. I'm kind of okay with it.
Yeah. When we were gonna make a non-animated list, one of mine was gonna be Vader doing the same thing, but like you failed me for the last time, and then he promotes. He's like Captain Piet, blah 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 blah.
Oh yeah.
Now you are in charge, Admiral Piet. It's like
yeah, while the other guy is choking and dying.
Exactly.
The Piet actor does very little in those movies, but just him like the way he side eyes the guy choking as he's listening to Vader, and then like makes a head motion to like get rid of the body. It's so good. I have one more favorite moment from season 2. It is the top of my list. I think the best moment in all of animated Star Wars. Can you guess what it is? I am no Jedi. Yeah. It's the whole Ahsoka Vader confrontation. Everything about it is wonderful. As we talked about, if you heard our Kenobi wrap up, and I think the most direct kind of connection between Kenobi and the animated, Ahsoka knocks off one half of Anakin's helmet, Kenobi knocks off the other. They do this wonderful slow burn during those first 2 seasons, the second season of Ahsoka slowly figuring this out, not wanting to accept the truth, and then wanting to think that she can save Anakin, and then realizing that she can't. And there's so many good lines, but it's just that last one of, if I can't save Anakin, I will avenge him. Vader says, revenge is not the Jedi way, and she says, I am no Jedi.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's supposed to be a reference to Eowyn saying, I am no man from Lord of the Rings. Like, it's a great, like, woman moment. It's just such a great, like, payoff to her whole journey and everything we talked about from the Clone Wars. It's just, I can watch that scene. If I have to watch one scene from any part of Star Wars, as much as I love so much in live action, I think that may be my favorite 3 or 4 minutes in Star Wars.
It's up there for me. I mean, I was on exactly one of the Rebels episodes so far, and it was that one. Yeah. I was like, tell me when you're doing this one.
Yeah,
I want an excuse to rewatch this in 4 different languages. Like,
yeah,
it's so good. It's that whole. I think it's a 2-episode arc, right? Twilight of the Apprentice? Is it Twilight?
Twilight of the Apprentice, yeah. It's 21 and 22.
Like, there's so many good parts of it where, like, they come in and they fall down through the, the cracks and into this Sith temple. And then Ezra gets separated from the group and meets Maul. And the whole thing between Ezra and Maul, and then finally Maul's revealed to be who he is, and then he sides with them against the Inquisitors, and then I guess he leaves.
He almost immediately after that fight attacks Kanan and blinds him.
Right, he blinds Kanan first, right? And I think then he leaves, right? When Vader's showing up, he's like, oh, there's the moment with Vader on top of the TIE fighter. Like,
the most extra thing ever, and among other things, it's inside a building.
Yeah.
So he's not only controlling the TIE fighter, but he's making wind happen to make his cape flap in the wind.
Yeah. But presumably, I mean, I think you could interpret it different ways, but that's definitely the most fun way of reading the scene.
Certainly, he is using the Force to control the TIE fighter.
That's
like
for
there's no pilot in there.
I mean, he's flying yes, exactly. Nobody's in the TIE fighter. He's on the TIE fighter. It reminds me of a George Carlin thing where they're like, get in the plane. He's like, get in. I'm getting. Or they're like, get on the plane or blah, blah. He's like, I'm getting in the plane. Vader's like, I'm getting on the plane.
Yeah.
But
I like it.
Yeah, the whole like that whole fight scene is the culmination of such a great pair of episodes. And then the I am no Jedi is just this like, exclamation point on top of an exclamation point, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like top 5 for me, for sure.
It's very good.
I think end of season 7 Clone Wars is is a little more for me for some reason.
That's fair.
You know, but it's, you know, there's a level, and those are both on it.
And I mean, for me, that moment being so important is 80% because of the Clone Wars.
Right, yeah.
Because of all the stuff I saw about Ahsoka and Vader's connection. And, like, to me, it's very much paying off that last moment that you talked about, you know, in Vader and Ahsoka kind of, like, having their last thoughts about each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And to me, the best, like, if you're going to do a massive connected universe, which, like, I have some misgivings about, but if you're going to do it, the way to do it right, or the best thing you can do about it, is when you make one thing, then you make another thing that is enjoyable on its own, but even extra enjoyable because you saw the first thing. And then if you go back and see the first thing again, now you enjoy the first thing even more than before you saw the second thing. You know, where, like, the things really build on each other and inform each other. And so I think those two pieces, which I think are my two favorite moments of animation, or even just like this 2-episode arc and that 2 to 4 episode arc, really, right?
Yeah.
Because there's like 2 episodes of Order 66, and there's like 2 episodes of, like, you know, attacking Mandalore and whatever.
I like that we had the same one too. We're flipped, but
right, yeah, exactly. It's just, it's like, and they fit together so well. You know, the one pays off the other, and the first one sets up the other one, and yeah, absolutely.
So, funny enough, my last 2 moments are both from the same episode of Rebels, and it's not necessarily my favorite episode, but they're both just beautiful moments, and they're lower on my list. They're 6 and 8, and the first one I'll mention because it kind of pays off what we were just talking about. Because one other thing I like about the Twilight Apprentice episodes is Ezra is tempted by Maul, and not just in a, like, oh, he's so lost in rage, but because he is like, yeah, okay, maybe using some of these dark side powers are kind of not terrible.
Right.
And I think in some ways, like, Maul makes some good points along the way.
Sure.
And so in literally the next episode, Rebels Season 3, it's Episode 1 and Episode 2 is the Steps into Shadow. And I think this moment comes in Episode 1, but it might come in Episode 2. But it's in that arc.
Yeah.
And it's where Ezra is still thinking about the dark side powers. He has a Sith holocron, and he's learning some things from it. And they're in a battle scene. And I got into a big argument with my other co-hosts and a lot of the fans. I think a lot of people disagree with this on me, and that's totally fine. I think they like the moment, but they interpret it differently than I do. But they're in a battle, and it looks like they're in real trouble. And I hold that he doesn't do this. I think they get killed, which is part of why I'm okay with it. He uses the Force to take basically mind control or body control of a person of an Imperial who's piloting an AT-AT.
Right.
And he basically, like, forces him to first shoot the other soldiers that are circling on his side, and then to, like, take the walker off a long cliff that's going to destroy the walker and the pilot himself. And it's very much shown as a dark side power, and I think it is. It is like robbing this person of agency. It is, you know, forcing someone to kill their buddies and kill themselves. And war is hell.
Right.
And I believe to some extent, I do believe, like, there are things you don't do in war, like, you know, killing civilians and stuff like that. But to me, like, if you're trying to kill someone and they're trying to kill you, and you find a way to stop them killing you and it kills them, I'm not going to lose too much sleep about what the exact morality of it is if there's not, like, collateral damage or stuff like that. And I really like that Ezra does that, and that it is clearly a kind of dark side moment, but in the show he kind of feels bad, but there's still some sense of, like, that's what I had to do in that moment. And so, yeah, it is one of my favorite moments in Rebels.
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. Like, I would mind control a lot of people in a war. Like, I think the idea that, oh, you shouldn't do that. You should just shoot at them to kill them. Like, what? Like, I mean, personally, I would be like, if there's any way of mind controlling them so they just stop shooting at me, that would be my first choice, right? You know? And, I mean, I agree with you. Like, yeah, don't kill civilians. To me, that's like, I mean, it is a part of war, but it's not it's like it's something else, you know?
Yeah.
But like when you're engaging enemy combatants, the idea that like, I don't know, I think we could do a whole episode on mind control, you know? And but like the idea that like if it was okay to shoot them, then I feel like it's definitely okay to mind control one of them to shoot the other. Like, get out of here. I don't know.
And I will say before a bunch of fans come after us, there are different interpretations of this moment. It could be mind control. Another version is that it's basically a puppet, and the way like you can use the Force to manipulate objects. He's basically like using the Force to manipulate the hands of the controller.
Right.
I think that's an interesting question, but I think it comes out the same way to me. Like you're denying a person agency and forcing them to do things they wouldn't do, including unaliving themselves. Right. And it's intense, but yeah, to me, like, I very rarely am going to be okay with that, but if I still am not like, oh, that's great, but yeah, if someone's trying to kill you and you think you need to kill them and you're doing good things, yeah, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, just be right about whether or not you're doing good things, you know? I mean...
Yeah, that's...
But yeah, I think it's kind of like Anakin in Clone Wars, where it is this like, you know, well, these are powers, right? How are you using your powers? Like, is a blaster dark side? You know, like it's, you know, I think that's that whole arc, which continues, right? The whole kind of Maul arc of Ezra sort of toying with the dark side, playing with it, and being like, well, what if this can, you know, teach us things? My last moment of, well, there's something else I could have mentioned, but like, well, you have one more, right?
I have one more. Yeah, I'll just say further on that. Yeah, they continue exploring this idea of Ezra playing with the dark side, and it's, I think in general, one of my favorite parts of the Rebels is that, I mean, Yoda would think Kanan Jarrus is a horrible Jedi.
Right.
Like, he has a lover, and he has a kid with that lover eventually. Like, he has attachments all over the place. Yeah. And to me, a lot of Rebels is like, yeah, maybe Force users can actually do really good things when they don't do the things that, you know, the Council was saying they had to do.
For sure.
So my last moment, and I think this moment it's important to me for what it represented. And it's also in that episode, Steps into Shadow. And it's when my absolute favorite character from the Star Wars books first appears. It's when Thrawn, I think is intentional, literally steps out of the shadows.
Yeah.
Grand Admiral Thrawn is this amazing character from the books. He was first written in Legends, and then he's been rewritten in the canon. And I think he appeared before he'd been rewritten in the canon, but I don't know the timeline there. But this was we talked before about how great it was, for me at least, when like Bo-Katan shows up in live action and like things from animation show up in live action. This is kind of like that happening on another level. Yeah. Because this is the first time that something from the books, and really from the Legends books, which like Disney had thrown them all out. A lot of fans were very angry about that. And some even think this Thrawn isn't the same as the one in the books. It's not, but I still, like, it to me was such a great moment of saying, look, we are going to pay attention to our history. We're going to pay attention to the written books. Those aren't meaningless. And we're taking this character from Legends, the thing that you all think we forgot about, and bringing him into the story. And I think, even if you've never read any of those books, I think Thrawn is a fantastic antagonist over these next 2 seasons. But for me, especially as someone who loved him so much from the books, I mean, I literally cheered when I saw him come on screen. So it's number 8 on my list of moments, but it's still up there.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Thrawn as a character. You know, I had heard about him before I saw him in Rebels.
Right.
You know, and I do really appreciate them being like, yeah, we are going to draw from, you know, the decanonized books, basically. Yeah. Right. And like, I mean, I don't care that much about canon in and of itself, but like, I do think like, look, if you have a great story somewhere, you have a great character somewhere, you know, yeah, use them, right? Yeah. And also, you know, when you have a beloved character, right? Like, yeah, make people happy. And I remember when we watched the Ahsoka episode of Mandalorian, he gets name dropped, and I remember you were like so excited. I was like, well, that definitely wasn't the highlight of the episode for me, but but I appreciate that, like, you know, that was for some people and that was a high bar because that was a great episode, you know, and it was like it was a promise basically that like, well, we told you we're doing an Ahsoka show. Here's Ahsoka, and she's talking about Thrawn. So who's going to show up in the Ahsoka show? Well, looks like Lars Mikkelsen. I think.
I really hope he's cast because he's a fantastic live action actor and was so good at the voice of Thrawn.
Yeah.
I just really hope they don't try to do live action space whales. Like, we don't need that.
I think they will. Like, I'm almost sure that they will. I mean, it'll just be CGI. But, like, I don't think they'll be on screen with a bunch of people very often.
I think it's probably true. I think it'll be a quick, like, here's what happened to them, here's how they came back.
Right, yeah. I love the space whales, though. As much as the whole thing is super ridiculous, like, I do enjoy that.
I just watched that episode again where they, like, rescue them on the gas planet, and it's just so good.
Yeah. I have one sort of stray moment and then one kind of paying off things moment.
Go for it.
The stray moment, it's more of an episode, or I think it's a single episode, and then he shows up again later. But AP5, who's the you know, Imperial inventory droid, I think, right? Who basically gets turned by Chopper. And is like, why am I working for the Empire? You know, and I just really enjoyed that, like, droid episode, and I often do, and I liked that, like, Chopper made a droid friend, and wait, was that the episode? That's the episode where Chopper, like, gets a new leg, right?
I think so.
That's like the plot, which I also enjoyed.
Chopper is. It's funny to me that I don't have any Chopper moments because it was so hard to lower it to top 10. If I was doing only 10 moments from Rebels, a couple of them would be Chopper. Absolutely, he's just such a fun character.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. At first I was going to say that I thought he was voiced by D. Bradley Baker, but I think actually he's Dave Filoni.
Who does Chopper? Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot of great Chopper moments, and that was one of the ones that definitely was the kind of not. I feel like him having. Yeah, I don't think it's Dave Filoni.
I think if I have a favorite Chopper moment, it's when basically Londo, like, pulls a fast one over them and winds up, like, Kanan loses Chopper in a game of Sabacc to Lando.
Oh, yeah.
And then for that whole episode, Chopper is just like, nope, not going to do that. Lando owns me now. Like, he just is so... He's such a brat. It's just the best way to describe his character. It's
for
so
sure.
Good.
For sure.
And what was your last moment?
So my last moment is the end of the Maul arc, really.
Oh, God, yeah.
And not the Maul and Kanan arc. I mean, not the Maul and Ezra, sorry. But the end of Maul and Kenobi, which is a payoff of, years in the making, right? Because, I mean, I thought the best part of the Phantom Menace was the duel at the end, right? Yeah. Where Kenobi apparently kills Maul. Turns out it wasn't that simple. Apparently, the thirst for vengeance can keep you alive a long time or something like that, even when you lose half your body. But the whole Maul arc through all of, through all of the Clone Wars, and there's a lot of interactions with Kenobi, right? There's so much stuff going on. And then they reintroduce Maul here. They have him have a whole thing with Ezra, trying to turn him to the dark side, trying to make him his apprentice, right? And then finally, they're playing with the holocrons or something, and then they see, the planet with two suns. And so Maul goes there, I think, intending to kill Luke, probably. I think that's like the goal, right? Or something.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that is developed over a number of different episodes, but it's like and you saw it in a weird, like, Clone Wars Season 7 also had this, where Maul has somehow figured out the plan. Like, Maul knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And he figures out that Vader is Anakin, and he warns Ahsoka of it, and she just, one of the most heartbreaking parts of that is that she won't listen, and he's right.
Yeah.
And then, it's like, he basically figures out what's going to happen, and is like, I need to kill Luke. It's not exactly clear what he wants, but
maybe he's going to kidnap him and try and turn him or something.
To me, it's mostly just like, at this point, he lost his brother. He's been abandoned by Palpatine. He's been abandoned by Dooku. I never really had Dooku, but like, he has no one left. And in some ways, it's that, like, his connection to Obi-Wan is like the most important relationship in his life.
Yeah.
And they're like always fighting.
Yeah.
But like it's just such a. It's an enemies to not even friends, because he does kill him, but like, Kenobi has so much respect for him and like holds him while he's dying. And
it's meaningful enemies, right? It's like, there's meaning there beyond just the conflict. And that fight scene, it's a very brief duel, right?
Yeah.
The choreography is it references so many things, right? And I think he ends up, he's got like a certain stance, then he's got the classic Obi-Wan stance, and then he goes to, I think, what Qui-Gon did, right? In the first one, and kind of, because he knows what Maul's going to do against that, but then he has a counter.
Yeah, Maul uses the same move that he used against Qui-Gon, but Obi-Wan's ready for it. Right,
exactly. And, and the way it's shot, it's at night in the desert, and they all lit up by the glow of lightsabers. Mm-hmm. It's just, to me, it's a really great cap to the story of like Maul and Kenobi, basically.
Yeah. Agreed. And I will. This one I don't think is actually in the story the way I do think that you could read Zeb and Kallus. But I will say that that's an episode that launched 1,000 fan fictions.
Right.
Because there's a lot of people who want to see that as enemies to lovers. And I think, like, Obi-Wan flirts with people he's fighting a lot. Like, some of the interactions with him and Maul are definitely there. They're definitely there with him when him and Ventress are fighting. Like, at one point in the book Dark Disciple, this is fairly early on, forgive me for spoilers of just one little conversation, but I think I've told you this before, Paul, with your permission.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And Obi-Wan is telling someone how to get close to Ventress. And he says, it's important. Banter is important. When we were fighting, we would do this kind of, and the guy says, did you flirt with her while you were fighting? And Obi-Wan's like, well, yeah, kind of.
Yeah, it's so the word flirting is funny because I feel like in the generally accepted interpretation, there is a certain sort of sexual or romantic connotation. But at the same time, I think, the things that you're talking about are also there's a playfulness,
Yeah, I think that's more I don't think Obi-Wan is attracted to either of them.
Right.
In that way, but I think that it's a playfulness that has that kind of energy to it. So.
Yeah, and that honestly that resonates with me. Just from having fought my friends a lot in Taekwondo, and but also other games that happens in poker. It happens. It can happen in chess. Like any kind of game, there can be a sort of a banter and a playfulness and it, it's interesting when it's you're in a life or death duel, or usually that most of them are draws, but.
And some of it with Ventress is suggestive.
Sure.
I think some of that in a way it doesn't necessarily with Maul, but it's all playful. So I think that's about where we can wrap up in terms of animated moments. We've gone a good long while. Is there any other kind of last comments or last moments you wanted to mention?
No, we covered everything I had written down, and I mean, there's so many great moments throughout the hundreds of episodes of animated series that exist. I don't think either of us really watched Resistance.
I was going to say, I do think it's noteworthy that we had nothing from Resistance because neither of us really watched it. I watched a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
I think you watched one or two. And like, I don't want to slam on Resistance. I know it has its people who like it.
Mm-hmm.
There's been this trend on TikTok recently of people ranking their favorite. Sorry, there's been this trend on TikTok recently of people ranking all the different Star Wars TV shows, both animated and non. And we talk a lot about how divided Star Wars fandom can be. Like you mentioned, some of these movies, you're going to get very strong opinions that very much disagree with each other. As far as I can tell, the one thing that the one thing that the overwhelming majority of Star Wars fans agree on is that Resistance is their least favorite show, or they just haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And like, I think it's hilarious. I think if you didn't watch animation, but you listen to people talk about animation, I think it'd be very easy to forget that Resistance exists.
Right. Like it's...
And in some ways, it should be really interesting because it sets up the First Order. And I think part of it may be kind of people not loving the sequels, and part of it is that it is aimed at a younger audience than I think Rebels was, more to like what Clone Wars was early on, as far as I understand. And again, it has its lovers, but I do think it's kind of hilarious that like it is almost, you and I got this entire episode without ever mentioning it.
Right.
And it is very often forgotten by, like, I think if we hadn't brought it up, I think a lot of people just either never doesn't know or would have just completely forgotten that Resistance exists.
Yeah, like there's some other thing I think that has like these like 10-minute shorts or something that I watched one of, and I was kind of like, it just didn't do anything for me. I'm not sure if that is like, I don't even know what Resistance is. Like, it just never, and nobody was like, oh, you definitely should watch this. And like, maybe I don't know, maybe I'll watch it. Maybe we'll do an episode on it at some point. But like,
Resistance is about the early days of the Resistance and the early days of the First Order. And like, Phasma's a part of it. And like, I think the thing you're talking, very bad animation, but there was another show called Clone Wars, not the.
No, that's
Clone
definitely
Wars.
not. That's definitely not what I'm talking about. No, this had like Rey and BB-8.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure what that one is. So, yeah, all right. I think it's a good place to wrap up then. Thank you very much, Paul. You suggested this episode first. I think it was a really great thing for us to get into. As always, fans, we want to hear from you. What would be your list? We'll publish our lists and we'll list the different episodes. Paul is going to have to write it for that. But we gotta we have to post. No, we've got 48 hours before we have to post this, so maybe Paul will do it. Who knows? The best way to not get Paul to do something is to tell him he has to do it. So I probably have like screw the pooch there, but we'll see what can happen.
Well,
anyway though.
Okay, yeah.
I just went on a whole journey. But anyway, send us your lists. Send us what you think of our lists. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. Most importantly, as fans, be good to each other.
Word.
Sentence.
Paragraph. Okay, you're not going to say page. Fine. I'm out.